Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
This is the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com, and I'm here with
Dr. Howie Jacobson of howiejacobson.com.
another one of his other medical type of doctors. And Howie has the flu, and my understanding is that it's not really contagious through the podcast, right?
I think if we're not doing video, it should be fine.
Okay, good. So we don't have to freak out. Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about what's probably the worst, most destructive, most difficult thought that people have that causes them to keep overeating. And it's not what you'd think it would be. People think it's start tomorrow or just a little bit won't hurt. Those are pernicious, but they're not that difficult to overcome. You can't start tomorrow because tomorrow is not a day in the calendar. And if you push it off another day and reinforce your cravings and your start tomorrow thoughts with actually eating some junk, you're going to have deeper cravings and be more likely to say start tomorrow. So if you're in a hole, you got to stop digging. Just use the present moment to be healthy. And a little bit won't hurt. Everybody knows it's never just a little bit.
Yeah. For people for whom that's true, they don't need you.
Right.
There's a lot of people who can have a little bit of various foods and it doesn't do anything to them. They're like, okay, I had 2 bites of that cake. It was nice. I'm done. I'm not going to have it again for a while. And they can travel in peace without the thought of more cake following them like a Peanuts rain cloud. If it's true, it's true. But the people who are listening to this know it's not true for us.
Well, and I would also make the distinction that I think recovery from overeating has to do with moving your important decisions from your impulses and feelings to your intellect. When I say a little bit, just a little bit, I mean a little bit off plan. If you have a rule for yourself that says, I'm only going to have chocolate on the weekends, and it's Wednesday and your food monster says, hey, just a little bit won't hurt. That's what I'm talking about. And it could be that the rule is you never have chocolate, or it could be that you have it, only on Saturdays after a workout in a specific amount. Those, I call them squeals, or those pernicious thoughts, are fairly easy to squash when you kind of look at the logic of it. The thought that's difficult to squash for most people, because there's a lot of truth to it, is you failed so many times before. What makes you think this time will be any different? You've tried so many different programs. You've gone on so many different diets. You've sworn up and down 54,362 times that you're never going to go off plan again. Why do you think this time is different than any other time? I just wanted to kind of talk that through with you because I've had some recent insights about how to look at that. The solution that we found is really bringing everything back to the present moment, because your food monster is trying to introduce anxiety, doubt, and uncertainty into the present moment. It's saying that, I'm going to get you in the future because eventually I always do and I always did, so I always will. What it's trying to do is introduce uncertainty and doubt into the present moment. The future is an infinite string of nows. So if you always use the present moment to be healthy, you always eat healthy now, then you're going to get stronger in the future, not weaker. It's kind of like your binge-free now muscle. And the more you exercise it, the better it gets, the stronger it gets. So it doesn't get weaker in the future, it gets stronger. I also tell people that the path to success seems to go through repeated failure. So people who have repeated failures behind them have learned something with every attempt. And so they're more likely to succeed now than ever before. So that's a reason to think this is different. And also because we provide them with a lot of tools they haven't used before. The most recent insight I've had is that thought's always going to be there. You're always going to have had that history. You can't erase your history. It's true that you've tried a million times before and failed. But it's also true that people can't until they can, and they fall down and get up until they stay up, and all the things we were talking about just before. That's also true. So the question is which one you focus on. Your food monster wants you to focus on your history and how many times you failed before, because it really wants you to fail. The reason it really wants you to fail is it would like to have some of the, we call it slop, but junk or off plan food. It would like to have that right now. So there's a motivation for focusing on that. But the people who succeed long term, they choose to allow that history to be there and acknowledge it, but they choose to focus on their binge free now muscle and the fact that they're getting stronger and stronger, and that the future is an infinite string of nows, and that the path to success goes through repeated failure. And fall down 7 times, get up 8, like the Japanese proverb says. And the name of the game is staying in the game until you win the game. And if you choose to focus on that, that thought eventually crowds out your past failures. If you choose to focus on the past failures, and those thoughts crowd out your adopting the current success. So that's my best thinking on this. This is certainly how I did it. It's certainly how I see people that have long-term recovery have done it. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, it certainly has been the biggest. I call that voice in my life the bully, because that's how it feels like when I kind of get excited about something. If I picture myself as like, the skinny kid with the flood level jeans going to school, like excited about like, today I'm going to learn something and I'm going to share it and I'm going to be popular. And then, the bully comes and like slams me into a locker and everyone laughs, really taking the wind out of my sails. And I have had that voice around things much more fundamental to me than food, just around like making friends or making money. So I've thought a lot about this, and it's a very, very common voice, and it does tend to undermine everything, as you said. So I've done a few different things. One of them I know is very much up your alley. I asked my clients to come up with counterexamples of things they couldn't do until they could. I start with something like not crying when you're tired, hungry, or wet. Like that was the skill you were born with. Walking, reading, writing, tying your shoes, downloading a PDF, brushing your teeth. Every single one of those things you hadn't done until you had.
Are we supposed to not cry if we get tired, hungry, or wet?
You can, but you don't have to.
I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
The point is, we're talking about liberation from compulsion.
You have developed the option to choose.
Yes. The option to choose is exactly what the bully wants to deny us. I learned from you that owning your decisions is the key. So, one of the things that feeds the bully is if every time I deviate from my plan, I call it a mugging, relinquish responsibility for it, then I'm feeding that narrative. So, one of the places to beat the bully is when I do go off plan to say, I chose to do this, right? Because I always had the option.
There you go.
One of the things I learned from Stephen Hayes, who's one of the co-founders of ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, is like, everybody falls down. And what he works with clients who come and tell him that they've failed, he'll say, okay, now I have a choice. You can quit or get back up. So again, we're returning to optionality, to choice. He doesn't tell them what to do. And, there's things I've tried in my life where I have quit just because I felt like it's not worth whatever. There's other things that are more important, or I can live with this. It's not the problem I thought it was, or I'm rationalizing it. But there's also things where I can say, no, I'm getting back up, just like that proverb. And the third thing that comes to me is when I do group coaching programs around a behavior. I learned to do this because I would have this attrition problem when I started doing this, and people would just fall off. They wouldn't show up anymore. And I'm like, they paid money for this, and it runs for another 6 months. And why haven't they shown up? And it was because they messed up and they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to come back and admit it. They didn't want to feel like, oh, they've lost their money. The bully's like, oh, well, you messed up again. This is so typical of you. So I'd lose them. What I started doing at the beginning of every course is I would give a speech about this. I say, there will come a time. I would do it in a very sort of tendentious voice, voice of God. There will come a time where You will do something and you will think to yourself, oh, I don't want to talk to Howie today. I'll talk to him next week. I'll skip this one. I'll get things back under control and then I'll show up in 2 weeks. Think about all the times that you have given up in the past. That's the moment. It wasn't the mess up. It was the moment when you decided that you weren't going to do the hard, scary thing. What I want from each of you now is a commitment. When that moment happens and every cell of your being is screaming for you to cancel or not show up, that's when you show up, and that's what's going to make the difference.
That's beautiful. I love that.
It worked better. Yeah. I mean, still, I can't, force people to face their fears, but it did help people put that moment in perspective.
I spent a whole slide in my very first video of our program talking about why there's really no reason to be ashamed. Whatever they think they've done with food that's so different, I've probably done it twice as bad as they did. If you look at the setup in our society for overeating, chemicals that turn off your ability to know when you're hungry and full in the bags, boxes, and containers, and all the money that's spent on hitting our revolutionary buttons and how easy it is to get calories. It's a very sick food environment. I don't know anybody that hasn't messed up. I do have a guy, I think he hasn't broken a rule in 3 years, but he messed up before then a bunch of times along the way. I can't say that I haven't broken a rule in 3 years. I can't say that I haven't binged in 3 years. The illusion of powerlessness has left me. The illusion that I could abdicate free will and responsibility, that's completely left me. The ability to do everything perfectly beyond measure and never ever make a mistake, I haven't quite acquired that yet. But I have maintained a 75, 80-pound weight loss. I have gotten chocolate and sugar out of my life, and I have 99.2% of the time peace with food on a regular basis, reliably, consistently for 20 years. Is it 20 years? It's almost 20 years. But I spend a lot of time trying to eliminate the shame that people feel. I tell them there are no overeaters' prisons. You're not going to wake up in a cell with 4 gray walls on your new husband, Bubba, because you ate too many donuts. What you in for? Too many donuts. It's just not going to happen. Overeaters are people. We don't tend to drink and get behind the wheel and maim or mutilate or kill someone. We don't even tend to blow up the family finances like people with alcohol or drugs do. We tend to get very depressed and kind of sullen and morose and mad at ourselves and spend a corresponding amount of time sweating it out on the couch. But we don't really hurt other people with what we do. You can make an argument that you're putting your family at risk because you can't necessarily be a provider for them or be a good mom, or it has an impact on other people, but it's not the same thing. So I don't think there is a rationale for overeaters to feel shame. I think that guilt is a useful emotion for a very brief period of time to get our attention. And then I think if we turn guilt into responsibility and make whatever adjustments we need to make, then it's served its function and we can let it go, turning guilt into responsibility. But I don't see any reason for us to feel shame whatsoever.
Yeah, I play a game with philosophy around the concept of free will. So I tell myself the only time I have free will is right now. I did not have free will in the past, and therefore there's nothing to be ashamed of. And it's a game, and you have to figure out if playing it is right for you. But first of all, I certainly don't have free will now about the past, right? There's nothing that I can do to change my past decisions.
That's true.
And so therefore, guilt, like, why am I feeling guilt now? It's trying to get me to do something that's impossible to do, which is to not eat a donut yesterday. That philosophy kind of takes a little bit of the edge off of guilt and shame. When I think about it, as my mind is trying to get me to do the right thing, right? Like guilt and shame, for most people, it's a positive intention. Like evolutionarily, I think the evolutionary purpose of guilt and shame is to inhibit us from behavior that would get us ostracized or killed by our tribe. So I appreciate that there's value in that. There's survival value in the circuitry that runs shame and guilt. But the only useful time is to stop me from doing something I'm about to do. Once it's done, then shame and guilt it's all after the fact, and it's only going to make it more likely for me to mess up in the future.
I love it. I also tell people When they come to me having binged and they're feeling powerless with this whole squeal again, well, you do it every time, why not again in the future? I remind them that they made the choice to binge. They were actually there. And we kind of walk through, where did they get the first off plan bite? And when did the idea come into their head, and what did they do? And, they'll tell me, well, they drove over to the 7-Eleven and they parked in the back and they took the keys out of the car and they closed the car door and they walked into the store and they walked up to their favorite counter and picked up, their favorite treat, and they walked back to the cashier and they handed it to the cashier and they said hello to the cashier. They were aware they had a moment, they could have stopped if they wanted to. They took out their wallet, they put in their credit card or took out their money, they paid for it, they took the bag back, they walked back to their car, they opened the car, they sat down in the car, they took out the bag, they opened the bag, then they opened whatever package it was and they put the food into their mouth with their hands and they decided to chew and swallow it. Every moment along that path was an opportunity that they had free will and could have decided not to. So what's useful about that is that you realize, well, if I decided to binge, like rather than said I had a relapse or something like that, but Jack Shrimpry calls it a reversal of intent. If I engaged in a reversal intent and I decided to binge, I had the free will to do that, then I also have the free will not to. Because of the shame, because of people lacking the ability to manage the guilt, they avoid the guilt by trying to disclaim responsibility for the actions. In so doing, they create this illusion of powerlessness and helplessness, which is crippling. And by just simply taking a little bit of a hit, of, yeah, I decided to binge. I had these rules, I worked really hard at them for a while, and then I made the decision to binge. You are reclaiming your free will and responsibility. And the trade off is well worth it. The energy and price you pay for saying that you're powerless so you can say this wasn't your fault, you didn't decide to do it. You have to rework your whole psyche. You have to live a different life and you have to kind of live in fear of, what if this monstrous thing inside of you rears up its ugly head and has its way with you again? I try to clear the way for people to turn guilt into responsibility and claim their power. It does all come back down to looking at the present moment and recognizing that the choice to embrace your free will and responsibility makes everything better. And all you have to do is binge free now. And you do have the free will to stop binging. Even if, by the way, as you're listening to this, you have some junk in your mouth, you have the ability to spit it out and have the last few minutes of this podcast without binge food. You do have that ability. So,
Get me a garbage can.
right.
You were talking to me personally.
I
Okay.
wasn't talking to you personally. I was not.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts about that. What you recommended a book to me that I finished yesterday. One of the joys of having the flu is that screens annoy me, so I'm actually picking up books made out of trees. So I finished Making Things Better by Making Them Worse by Alan Fay about paradoxical therapy. And I don't think I would do most of what he suggests as a coach occasionally in certain situations. But one of the things he said is he gets his clients, if they have a bad habit or even a compulsion, so that he has them intentionally do it, like to schedule it, to prove to themselves if they can choose to do it, then eventually they begin to realize they can choose not to do it. I wondered what you thought of that.
That's interesting. It kind of depends upon the strength of the addiction. Because while I do believe that you can overcome any addiction with, mental toughness and strength of mind, and I don't believe in the concept of addictive disease, I do also see that neurological grooves are built very deep and the brain has a very strong desire to automate the acquisition of calories. And so when you do have a habit that's very strong, and if you've managed to stop doing it, I don't know that I would consciously and purposely tell someone to reverse that, because I know that once they enter the extinction curve, that if it's a daily habit, it's only going to be 30 to 45 days before that thing doesn't bother them anymore. I don't want to bring that back. But if someone is binging on and off all the time and feeling entirely powerless and like they have no options, then I might use that as an intervention. That's interesting. I forgot that he said that. I remember it now from the book, reading it 20 years ago, but that's cool.
This is why we recommend books to other people so they can remind us what's in them.
This is true.
So you know that I'm working on this thing for the last 3 years around memory reconsolidation and the idea of coherence, that all of our behaviors make sense given deep predictions, often unconscious predictions. And I find that that's a different way, a different flavor of taking responsibility. The language is someone will come to me to change, and they are adopting an anti symptom position. They're like, I don't want this. It's terrible. It serves no purpose. And I can try to ask them, like, you're doing it, so it must serve some purpose to some part of you, or there's something going on. As long as people are like, no, this is just terrible, they're saying I'm a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. I have no understanding of why I'm doing this. Some part of them can articulate a pro symptom position, right? Like the way you did when we were talking about it was your Bosco, right?
Yeah. My mom used to leave a bottle of chocolate Bosco on the floor for me in the kitchen.
All right. That served a purpose for you. It gave you a substitute, or it made bearable a situation that otherwise would have been unbearable.
It was my mommy substitute.
Kids shouldn't need a mommy substitute. It's a form of like, yes, this served a purpose. And doing so, I think, is a form of agency, saying that I did this to take care of myself, and I still have the ability to make the best decision to take care of myself. And obviously, times have changed. I'm not 3 years old anymore, and I don't need chocolate to be nurtured.
Exactly. Howie, could you just say the pivotal insight from this discussion I got was that the hard moment, the moment when you make a choice to recover or not, it's not when you screwed up, but when you decided to hide the screw up. How did you say it?
It was when you decided to not show up, to not face the present emotional consequences. It's almost like I'd rather face the long-term health and weight and self-esteem issues of my behavior than face the emotional truth of what I've done.
Gotcha. I love that. I really love that. That was insightful. That's the pivotal moment. Not when you make a mistake, because people make mistakes, but when you decide not to face that emotional truth. Agreed.
I've seen this in my relationships, where if there's a moment of courage where somebody says something a little bit differently, then all of a sudden the entire trajectory changes, right? As opposed to people playing out the same arguments, the same fights, the same dance of, one up, one down, avoid, attack. And one person has the courage to do something slightly different. I don't know if you ever into transactional analysis.
TA for Tots. I remember that book.
I remember, is it I'm okay, you're okay, and games people play?
Yeah. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. This idea of the game, it's not meant to be a frivolous statement, but like we get into these patterns where the game is we're trying to get something other than what we claim to be trying to get. Right? Like I'm trying to have a rational argument with my spouse, but what I'm really trying to do is prove that I'm the adult and she's the child. When you see like, oh, when I step out of that game and I can say, oh, I just felt the energy to make you wrong so I could feel right. I apologize for that, and I'm going to take a breath. Then all of a sudden, everything can change.
Hmm. Right. When you can identify the secondary gain. You have one idea of what you're doing and why you're doing it on the surface, but people often think, well, what's it going to be like in 5 years' time if I keep binging? Typically, I run that exercise like the ghost of Christmas future, where I'm looking for all the horrific things that are going to happen with their health and their well-being and their confidence and their energy level and their relationships and their productivity. And I'm trying to show them that they're not really treading water. They're probably getting worse if they allow binging to happen. That's helpful. But another way to run it is to say, okay, imagine it's 5 years in the future and you let your pig run wild. You just let your inner food monster do what it wanted to do. What are three good things about that? I don't let them say any of the bad things. What are three good things? Well, I wouldn't have to deal with Aunt Ethel. I wouldn't be going to socializing and events and everything, and I wouldn't have to deal with Aunt Ethel. I could stop spending so much money on clothes, and I could get to eat whatever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to. Even though I'd be miserable, I'd still get to eat all that stuff. And then you can run that backwards and say, well, okay, let's say that you ate perfectly for 5 years. I want you to imagine yourself 5 years in the future having eaten perfectly. What are three bad things about that? Well, I wouldn't be as fun as parties, and a lot of times these things are not true, but the imaginations are a secondary gain. I would not be as much fun at parties, and I would not be drinking. I would probably be living a very long life, which means that I have to plan for a longer retirement and make more money. you know and if you force yourself to do that, you can find three forms of secondary gain that are keeping you stuck in some way.
Yeah, I love that because the problem with secondary gain is that we don't want to admit it because we think that's going to weaken us.
Right.
And if I don't admit it, then it's got this imaginary power. Like I have no idea if I don't look at it. But when you invite people to really look at the secondary gain and they own it and they say, yes, this is positive, this is positive. If I could have all that without the negative, I certainly would. Now I'm looking at a balance sheet as opposed to a fact versus a mystery. Love it.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you for this, Howie. This was terrific.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.